Hello everybody and welcome back to my channel. If you're new here, my name is Emma and I make art videos, and today I thought I would draw a realistic eye and give you guys some tips for doing so. Firstly, I find myself a good reference image, and the one that I'm using here is actually a photo of my own eye. I'm sure there are plenty on Google that you can find, but for copyright reasons I thought it would be best to use a photo of my own eye, and if you want to do the same you can, you don't have to. And if it's just for practice in like your sketchbook, then I'm sure you can use any reference image because it's not like you're going to be selling it or anything like that. So once I've got my image, then it's time to just map out the drawing really lightly and working on the proportions, because the proportions are a very important part of drawing realistically. If your proportions are off, it's just not going to look realistic. And so yeah, you want to get these right to begin with. You don't want to go in with detail in one spot and then find that, oh wait, this is actually in the wrong spot. You know, it's going to save you a lot of hassle down the track. And yeah, so I highly recommend working on your proportions to begin with and not going in with too much detail just yet until you're happy with the proportions. So as you can see, I am going in with some darker lines now, adding a little bit more detail, working on the upper and lower lash line, and just kind of like defining more areas. Apart from proportions, shading is another very, very important part. So here I am just lightly going in with where I want the darker areas to be, where there's going to be some shadows and that kind of thing, because you might have your proportions, you know, perfectly done, but if you don't know how to shade, it can still look really off, and vice versa as well. You know, if your shading is amazing but your proportions are off, it's still going to look off. So you really need to work on both of those things, and once you're happy with the proportions and you know where kind of all your shading and shadows and highlights are going to go, then you can kind of go in and darken certain areas. So for me, I wanted to go and work straight on the iris and pupil just because it is the focal point of the piece, and by darkening this area it made it easier to shade the white part of the eye, which is never going to be completely white, but kind of having that dark area in the middle, it kind of let me know, okay, I can go this dark on this area, and it's not going to look, you know, weird or anything. When you're shading and adding shadows, it's also really important to think about the texture that you are trying to achieve. You know, not everything is going to be smooth or textured, and for the darkest areas here and for the actual eyeball, it's going to be a lot smoother. So the eyeball and the eyelashes, they're quite smooth, whereas the skin is quite textured. So that's another thing that you need to think about when you're creating something realistically. And another thing is also just understanding what it is you're drawing. So for example, if you're drawing the human body, it's important to think about the muscles and the bones underneath the skin and how they're creating that shape. So, you know, with the eye, you have to think about, you know, the eye is a spherical, is that the right word? Object that is in your skull's socket, and there's skin covering that. And obviously you have the opening where the eye is, but it's really important to kind of think about what's going on underneath, as well as, you know, what's just on the surface and what you can actually see. And another thing to think about when you're drawing from a reference image is drawing what you see and not what you think you see. You may be thinking, I see eyes all the time, you know, I know how to draw an eye. And I mean, for me, I can draw a pretty decent realistic eye without a reference image because I've drawn them enough and I know how, you know, how they work. But even for me, like, using a reference image is going to just make it that much better. And it's going to be so much more helpful, especially if you are kind of just starting out. And actually a cool thing to try is actually, rather than looking at your reference image and being like, this is a human eye, think of it as just, you know, shadows and highlights and shapes rather than a specific thing. Maybe even try turn your image upside down so you're not actually thinking, you know, I'm drawing an eye. You're just thinking, I'm drawing this shape with shadows and highlights. And that way you might not be like, I'm going to draw the eyelashes because I know how they are, whereas they might actually be slightly different in your reference image. So anyway, that's something to think about. Hopefully you guys found this video helpful or interesting. But yeah, that is all from me today. So here is the finished drawing. Thank you so much for watching, and I will see you all in my next video.